On the most recent episode of his podcast, Zach Lowe completely rips the Chicago Bulls over their decisions and how they've managed their assets over this offseason. We're going to take a look at that. Plus, I want to talk about one fatal flaw that the Chicago Bulls have with their current roster construction, and is there a move left to kind of fix that? And then lastly, we're going to look at a proposed trade that would send Zach LaVine to the Golden State Warriors, but also a 3-team trade involving the New Orleans Pelicans, so we can also offload Nikola Vucevic. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So I want to start off with Zach Lowe on this podcast. And while the Chicago Bulls have made decisions to change the direction of their roster, how they went about it has caused a lot of questions being asked by basketball pundits, Bulls fans, because of the Bulls' inability to really strike on getting the most out of the assets that they had available. And while I don't think anybody's really too negative on the Chicago Bulls for finally picking a direction, it's how they went about it that they've made it extremely harder on themselves to, maybe make this rebuild a more easier thing, having the most assets, right? You look at a team like the Utah Jazz, while they're still in the midst of it, after showing some initial promise, after, moving on from Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, they got tons of assets back for it. And, a lot of teams look at also OKC Thunder, what they did, even though they traded and sent off multiple stars and got a bunch of picks back where they're still living off a lot of those picks. They can make a move for any player that they want. It'd be hard for teams to really match up with that. What the Chicago Bulls have done here is that they've sold low on basically every asset that they've had. And of course, the woulda, coulda, shoulda, the hindsight, but the Bulls front office's inability to kind of recognize moving off of this earlier has really hamstringed them a lot. But let's go ahead and get into a clip from Zach Lowe here.
And now you're like, wait a second. We're hard capped at the first apron. We don't want to pay the tax because, God forbid, the Chicago Bulls pay the freaking luxury tax.
No money there,
so
right?
We have like a double hard cap against us now because of the way we arranged our finances. We have to trade DeMar DeRozan, and we can't get the good stuff back for DeMar DeRozan. It's an absolute disaster. I have no idea. Like, the fact that they arrived at this point where they have to surrender in the DeRozan trade and let another team come and poach the good stuff from the DeRozan trade is a disaster. LaVine is still on the team. He appears to have no market at all. Vucevic is still on the team for 2 years, $40 million, which is a deal I thought was okay at the time. I have no idea where they can offload Vucevic. I said when they did the Caruso for Giddey trade, which we don't need to rehash, that maybe the Bulls were accidentally tanking, that this was going to be a tank job that the fans have been waiting for so long, almost by accident. This is another move in that direction, except they still have Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic on the team. What is this team? Chris, if their starting five is Josh Giddey, Zach LaVine, Kobe White, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic, what in the world are we doing here? I mean, like, that, first of all, that lineup is going to be a complete disaster defensively. Offensively, it could be okay if Patrick Williams does stuff. Like, can you do stuff? Can you do some stuff? This is the year where the Patrick Williams is only 22 years old and X amount of players in the first round that were just drafted are older than him. This is it expires now. This is over. This is your freaking fifth year, man. Like, it's time to actually do some stuff. Okay. And I like some of those players. Ayo Dosunmu off the bench. He's not in my projected starting five. He's awesome. Buzelis, we'll see what he brings you. They haven't gotten much out of Dale Interior, Julian Phillips. I mean, you'd like to get something out of those pieces. And ideally, you would just pull the ripcord completely, get Vooch out of there, get LaVine out of there, and join the tank race properly, which, by the way, you're going to have to out-tank Brooklyn. That's going to be hard. You're going to have to out-tank Washington. That's going to be, you don't have to out-tank them, but to get one of those top four spots in the lottery, it's Brooklyn, Washington, and I think the Bulls are not far from being in a position to challenge for one of those top 4 spots?
And so I agree with a lot of what Zach Lowe said, right? And you look at when the Spurs getting a unprotected pick swap. Now, I look at that and say a pick swap, it's in 2031, I think. So it depends on where the Kings are at that point and then where the Spurs are. The Spurs, if Wemby hits this acceleration like people will, especially by 2031, you're looking at 7 years from that. That could be a very beneficial pick swap for the San Antonio Spurs. So we'll see what happens there, right? Yeah, they took on the bad salary in Harrison Barnes, and I love that Zach Lowe pointed out the fact that you hard capped yourself and you did it in a way to where you weren't able to take back bad salary. That is one thing that, taking on bad salary allows for you to do. It allows for you to get more assets. Teams have to give a first-round pick if you're taking on a bad and dead salary in a deal. And I can understand why a lot of Bulls fans and even Zach Lowe look at that and say, hey, AK, you really didn't take advantage of it. Alex Caruso and DeMar DeRozan were two of the best assets that we had. And of course, at the trade, had they been moved at the trade deadline last year, we could have got a lot more back for it as far as picks. Now, I've gone on to say many times that it seems like AK and Eversley value what Josh Giddey could be more than a low pick in last year's draft, but it's the fact of the accumulation of assets that you could have possibly had to make different deals at that point in time. And that's just where it is. This Bulls team, I'm not one that on the luxury tax, spending into the luxury tax doesn't guarantee that you're going to win. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the best. And I know that that's a thing that's constantly looked at and thrown towards the Chicago Bulls because there have been situations to where you could have made your team better by going into the luxury tax, even if it was for 1 year. And so what Zach Lowe has called out here is a lot. There's a lot of validity to it. Now, I do think there are some situational things in it, and I think it's easy to always kind of look in and say the luxury tax. You pay the luxury tax, especially for a team that doesn't do it. It's easy, it's low-hanging fruit to always go to that. But this is a situation that the Bulls, in going in a rebuild, had they been willing to go into that luxury tax to take on more bad salaries, there's no doubt about it that we would have been able to gain more assets even this offseason had we not. So you've double kind of put yourself in a bad situation when it comes down to it. And so where we sit right now, man, it's bad. I mean, it just is what it is, man. The Bulls and what they did when they were trying to win now, they did it in the sense of a small market team. Like, it just is what it is. We were trying to win now when we got DeMar, when we got Vooch, when we got Lonzo, and we avoided the luxury tax then. And then at the end of the day, right, when you then move on from that, you now put yourself in a worse situation. And keep in mind, Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic are still on this roster. And these are assets that you seemingly can't get very much back for if you're listening to a lot of the rumors and things like that. And this Bulls team just continues, right? And that's where my concern comes at when you're looked at this rebuild, right? Is that the Bulls' lack of ability to recognize where they are is something that causes me a lot of concern for this because, yeah, you've now gone towards the rebuild, which shout out to you for doing that. All right, cool. You finally picked that direction. You get kudos for that. But like, how much are you going to be able to see it through? How much is your own lack of foresight going to hold you back from really being able to take the most advantage of where you're going? And then as well, like I said, the Bulls put themselves right back into a weird cap situation with the fact that you got to extend Josh Giddey. And then you got to, on top of that, after extending Josh Giddey, let's say, yeah, you extend Josh Giddey at the end of the next season. Let's say, hopefully that means he plays well. You then have to extend Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu possibly the year after that, right? And now you're still a team that has tons of question marks. Maybe at that point you don't have your for sure future star by then. And then you're put right back into the situation where you're paying for a team that could be exciting, that maybe could compete for playing spots, and you're still right back. And that's the thing. The Bulls spent all this time, the last 3 years, being right where they would have possibly been had they not traded off all their young players to get Nikola Vucevic, eventually sign Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan. They sit in the same exact spot, probably. And we now have the chance to do that again, end up sitting in the same exact spot few years down the road, unless somebody really makes a huge step, or we get lucky, we do get hit in that lottery, we get one of those best players in next year's draft that really then extend the Bulls ceiling. But it's a lot. Listen, Zach Lowe has the right to have a lot of questions there. Like I said, I don't agree with everything he said and how he laid it out, but there's a lot of validity to what he said. And it's added into the point. One thing that he brought into that is that if Zach LaVine comes back, what is the lineup going to be? And that gets us to our next topic, the Bulls roster construction. When you look at it, if the Chicago Bulls do trade off Zach LaVine, considering the players that they've lost, that would be taking away 43.5 points per game with the departure of Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. That's if you move on from that. Let's just say if not, you're still missing out in over 20 points per game. And let's say Kobe White does extend himself. Let's say he does go into, from last year averaging 19 to averaging 20, 25 points per game. Him and Zach LaVine being on the court together with a point guard like Josh Giddey as a playmaker, maybe that can happen. But then you're looking at Nikola Vucevic to step up his scoring. DeMar DeRozan is not there to operate the same space he is, maybe. You're then looking at Ayo Dosunmu, who isn't really a scorer. Don't get me wrong. Ayo Dosunmu's had some games where he's absolutely filled it up for the Chicago Bulls. But at the same time, part of what makes Ayo so good is the efficiency in which that he was scoring at. And so I don't know if you ever want to see Ayo Dosunmu turn into like this volume shooter. But again, maybe the Bulls do want to take a look at that. He averaged 12 points per game last year, but he averaged a lot more when you look at as a starter. With the way that the lineup is shaking up, he's not going to be a starter anymore. But to give him his credit, as a starter, he averaged 15.4 points per game on only 12 shots, so still not taking a whole lot of shots. And he shot the ball at over 50% from the field, which, again, you got to give him credit for, and over 41% from three-point range. And he still took a decent amount of threes at 5.1, right? Averaged 4.5 assists, over a steal per game, 3.5 rebounds. So maybe there's something to say that Ayo Dosunmu can make his numbers, that 12-point per game average, closer to what he did as a starter, because he's probably going to be the first guard off the bench. So let's say he can give you 15 points per game, right? But the Bulls, while, a lot of people have talked about the Bulls potentially defense being their biggest issue, which it is. Let's make no mistake about it. Offense still can be a struggle for the Chicago Bulls team. Josh Giddey, he averaged 16.6 points per game in his second season, but the fact that he's not a shooter, the fact that he's never probably going to be an elite scorer, I think he can be an efficient one. He's going to be a solid playmaker. You're then looking at Patrick Williams, Manus Bucilis, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, right? Some of these guys stepping up. Jalen Smith, who's averaged 9 points per game before, maybe extending himself to over the double-digit range. But this team, as much as they are going to struggle defensively, they are going to struggle offensively too if Zach LaVine's not on this team, well, depending on what you get back. And that'll get into maybe one of the proposed deal that we're going to talk about here at the end of the show. But this is a team that, for a lot of Bulls fans that think that this team is going to compete and that there's not going to be bad enough, I love that Zach Lowe said that they could be right outside that bottom four because the offensive efficiency just isn't there. They're going to play an exciting brand of basketball, and I think they're going to get easy buckets at times because of their rebounding guards, how they can rebound as well. They can get out and run in transition. I do think that this team is going to play an exciting brand of basketball, but it just, when you have the offensive limitations that this team is shaped up to have on top of the defensive limitations, it once again points towards, AK, does he not know how to construct a roster? We still don't have very much three-point shooting, and that's even with Zach LaVine, Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, what they've done three-point shooting-wise. Patrick Williams, they've shot efficiently from three, but we've seen them. They've been on this team for years now. We've never been an efficient three-point shooting team, and the math problem still exists. And then you get into the defensive limitations because I'll tell you what, a starting lineup of Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic, that's barbecue chicken. You're going to get cooked in pick and roll. You're going to get cooked at the paint. You're going to get cooked in those certain areas. Now, maybe, Ayo Dosunmu steps up some defensively. Patrick Williams is an above average defender in this league as well. Manus Bucilis, his weak side defense, his off-ball defense is solid. He's going to struggle on ball, probably his first year as well there. It's just, this is a team that is going to struggle. And, if you're while you're in a rebuild, roster construction isn't always going to be the best to start off because you're trying, not trying to be bad per se, but you're going through a thing of evaluation, seeing how these players can turn out, and then you're trying to fill the holes based off how players are developing. But this is now a team that's gone from hoping that Patrick Williams makes that next step to really, really needing Patrick Williams to be that player that makes that next step. And maybe he can, right? One thing that I've learned in doing this job is that you never assume that a player can't extend themselves, that a player can't grow their game, right? Because we've seen it. Like, look at what Kobe White did A lot of Bulls fans a few years ago were egging and hoping that Kobe White was going to be traded, and I get that, right? Like, and then the Bulls end up, they keep him, he extends himself in year 5. Patrick Williams, you're moving into that year 5. Julian Phillips, you're moving into year 2. Dalen Terry, you're moving into year 3. Welcome Mattis Bucilis to your hometown team, but a hometown team that has really struggled with developing players right away, right? So this thing that the Chicago Bulls are going through is frustrating, and it's going to be some bloodletting out here for this Bulls team. I know that I've seen a lot of Bulls fans hold out hope that we're going to be a lot better this season than what people are expecting, and I hope that you're right. And if we do so, it's still going to be via just being young, being athletic, but it's still going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And for the now 4th, 5th year in a row, it seems like AK doesn't understand the value of having size and depth behind your big man position. We just don't have a whole hell of a lot of it, right? If Nikola Vucevic or Jalen Smith have an extended injury, you're hoping that Adama Sanogo can finally slide over. The Bulls give him an opportunity, and maybe he can excel in that. But you're still then betting on a player that just hasn't played a whole hell of a lot of NBA minutes. And while a lot of the more optimistic Bulls fans like to go to that 20-20 game, let's be clear, that was a garbage game for both teams. But Adama Sanogo did play amazingly well in the G League. He almost dominated his play in the G League. So there's some hope and desire there that he's going to be able to keep extending. And I do hope he gets some NBA minutes next year. But it's just the roster construction woes continue. And I was talking to somebody in the comment section that took umbrage with me saying that it's a weird lineup, and they kept focusing on, well, it's the best lineup. Yeah, that doesn't stop it to be weird. The Bulls are going to have weird lineups all up and down this team, trying to find balance, trying to find angles, trying to make pieces fit together. And that's not necessarily the worst thing when you're going younger and you're hoping that these players are going to develop on the fly for you. But then you still have Billy Donovan, right, who has not been the best at developing. He's been better than some people let on, right, as far as you look at Lou Dort, you look at Shea being there under Billy Donovan for that year as well. Like, Billy has done some developmental things, but it's nothing to sit there and say it's been great, because we've seen it here in Chicago for a long time, and we just haven't gotten a whole hell of a lot out of it. But, again, maybe some more balance and clarity comes if a Zach LaVine move, if a Nikola Vucevic move comes, but that could not be maybe until the middle of the season. That could not be maybe into 10, 15 games into the season, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to happen before the opening of training camp. But I guess we'll see. But something that I do want to talk about before we go, and you guys know I don't always like talking about trade proposals and things like that. If you guys call in with them, that's one thing. But we did have a decent trade proposal out there. And I want to go over this one. And it was a 3-team trade involving Brandon Ingram, Zach LaVine, the Golden State Warriors, and Nikola Vucevic. And so in this trade, it was the Chicago Bulls are getting Brandon Ingram and Andrew Wiggins, both players that, Brandon Ingram, I've been a big Brandon Ingram fan. I think that in the direction that we're going, though, maybe Brandon Ingram doesn't fit that. He's 26 years old, an over 20-point-per-game scorer. He is somebody that can come in. He's an expiring contract, so maybe the Bulls look to flip him. Even then, maybe the Bulls can force a sign and trade again next year like they did with DeMar DeRozan if they don't have him pegged in as part of their long-term plans. But he is that. Bulls get Andrew Wiggins as well. At this point, Andrew Wiggins is kind of an expiring deal. I'm not really looking. Well, I don't even think Andrew Wiggins is expiring. I think Andrew Wiggins has actually quite a few years left on his contract, but I'll take a look at that here to verify that. So Andrew Wiggins is under contract until the 2026-27 season, and he gets paid $30 million. That last year is a player option. So, yeah, that's the Bulls taking on more long-term money. I don't know if I see them doing that. But then the Golden State Warriors get Zach LaVine in this case, and the New Orleans Pelicans get Nikola Vucevic, Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, a 2025 first-round pick that's lottery protected. That's the Portland Trail Blazers pick. We know that turns into 2 second-round picks. And then 2028 and 29 second-round picks from the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls did just get 2 second-round picks in the DeMar DeRozan trade, so maybe that. This is a deal that I would say gets every team close to what they want, right? The Pelicans get a center, which they do need. They got Yves Missy down there, who maybe they look, but they get Nikola Vucevic and Kevon Looney. Take a look at that. The Golden State Warriors get that guard that they can come in. They can do some off-screen things for them in Zach LaVine, even though now that they got Teefs down there and Buddy Hield, maybe they're not looking at that. And the Bulls get Brandon Ingram, that's an expiring contract, Andrew Wiggins, who does have more years on his deal than Nikola Vucevic, but you're breaking up the thing. Again, I don't know. If we could reroute Andrew Wiggins to yet another team, make this a 4-team trade, or maybe trade him down the road, I'm not mad at it. Paying Andrew Wiggins into the 2026-27 season isn't ideal. Again, I know he can still be productive at times, but he's really fallen a lot since that championship year. And, overall, this is the Bulls unloading both Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, but at what cost? At what cost? Now, Andrew Wiggins' contract is less than Zach LaVine's for about the same amount of time, so maybe you're looking at it there. You're getting off Nikola Vucevic's contract a year early with Brandon Ingram, so maybe there's some benefit there. But the Bulls aren't getting any draft capital in this case. You're really just unloading Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, and then you're sending out basically, and I'm just going to assume the Portland pick does not turn into a first-round pick, but you're then basically you're sending out Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, and 4 second-round picks, and all you're getting back is an expiring Brandon Ingram, who maybe you say factors into your future plans, maybe not, and then an Andrew Wiggins until 2026-27. This deal benefits the Golden State Warriors and the New Orleans Pelicans, but it doesn't really benefit the Bulls in any really meaningful way unless you're just looking at Brandon Ingram as that player that because he's 26, maybe you can talk yourself into the timeline there. You got to pay him then, though, at the end of the season. So are you going to pay Josh Giddey and Brandon Ingram at the end of the same season? So it's confusing, but it's a trade deal that I know a lot of people have been talking about. I actually got asked if somebody could talk about that proposed deal with the Pelicans. And I would love to work out a deal with the Pelicans for just Nikola Vucevic, if you can do that without including Zach LaVine in the third team, so you're not giving up as much. But then again, what are you getting back? And I don't think you're going to do a Vooch for Brandon Ingram straight up without still giving up tons of picks. But maybe I'm wrong on that. You guys can let me know what you guys think on that down below. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. That's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.